right, thank you. We are out of executive session and it's now time for the Board of Education report. Mr. Weber.
Yes, just wanted to present the first read of the 2022-2023 district calendar. This comes as a recommendation from our district leadership team. And again, it's a great process of looking at all of the different potential calendar structures that balance student days in the first semester, second semester, tries to account for when we want to start, when we want to finish, how we can have the most advantageous instructional days before it's time for students to show their learning on any assessments that they have to take. And so what I wanted to do is just share some of the highlights from this calendar, and then if we have any questions, I'm happy to discuss those. So as you look at the proposed calendar, you can see that the start date falls within the second week of August, and actually it starts with a 3-day start for students. And our staff members have continually shared that that's beneficial for students to have a partial week as we start out during the course of the year. We have 2 professional development days that lead in on August 8th and 9th before the student year begins on August 10th. And then as you flip to the end of the calendar, that has us ending on May 26th before the Memorial Day weekend. You'll also see several professional development days throughout the year, as we have in the past. Those are connected to 3-day weekends. What we try to do is alternate those days, so they're not typically. They've always fallen on a Tuesday. We've tried to incorporate a Friday so that it's not always hitting the same day, because certain students who have scheduled classes on that day tend to lose those classes. So we tried to mix that up a little bit. You can see the winter break. This is a tricky year for the winter break, the way the calendar dates fall. So the winter break begins on December 24th. So students would be attending school through December 23rd, and then the winter break would be a 2 full week break. And then students would come back on January 9th after break. And so I think those are the highlights of the calendar. We've also put on there, scheduled our time on November 1st for conferences. We haven't always included that in the calendar. It's helpful to put that out there for families so that they can plan on that conference date. There was one question, the challenge is always, starting early. It seems sometimes like we creep up, and as the calendar dates change, sometimes it does appear as though we creep up in that start date. The district leadership team actually spoke about where we start and where we finish, and we're looking at moving, the potential moving past later than Memorial Day weekend. And then honestly, the challenge is that where the discussion went to was, would we rather have, what's the better instructional time? Is it on the front end of the year, or is it on the back end of the year after assessments? And so that question really drives us to, on the front end of the year, those days are probably more appropriate, more valuable educationally for students. And so we always kind of feel the pull of that, and which is important, because then it leads to that great conversation and the questions that kind of help determine, again, what's the most appropriate calendar to benefit student learning. And so with this in mind, that's where this calendar lies. Again, it's a first read, so we can think about it. Plenty of time for questions regarding the timeline and the placement of some of the dates that you see on here. Any other questions?
No, thanks for just putting so much work into it. I said every time now that I get to be on district leadership team, and last calendar prior to being on the board, it's like you bring 3 iterations to them. And so I'm sure prior to that, it's a lot of iterations and looking at the trickiness of how all of it falls. And so to see that, of like the options of where the break could have been, nothing's ever this perfect machine. So to talk about that is helpful. A quick question. I like that you just said better instructional time on the front end. Do you think that's just because they're fresh? Is that what they mean by it's like it's earlier, it's the start of the year, the instructional time?
I think more of the feedback that we received was that it's additional days before students have to take their assessments, and
oh, okay,
as opposed to additional days being added post-assessment time,
You
whether
said
that
that,
be
okay.
state assessment or state assessments, AP testing, right? So it's more days before the students are held accountable through those tests.
For instruction, okay,
Mhm,
thank you.
mhm.
All right. All right, thank you. Then we'll go on to the treasurer's report.
Do you want to motion to approve the first read?
Oh, all right, thank you. May I have a motion to approve the first read of this calendar?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Roll call.
Mrs. Yee,
Yes,
Mrs. Zoller,
Yes.
Mrs. Broderick,
Yes.
Mr. Meese,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas.
Yes.
Thank you.
Taste of that was wonderful, Rhonda.
Thank you. I'm working on that.
All right, now treasurer's report.
Thanks, Jeannie. Item A is resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing our necessary tax levies. This is a formal step in our budgetary process. The board adopts the tax budget in January. That is sent to the Budget Commission, and this is they approve our tax budget and then send back the amounts and rates, and then we approve those and send them on back to the Budget Commission so that our taxes can be collected for next fiscal year. Item B is fixed rate natural gas supply agreement with Volunteer Energy, and this allows us to procure our gas supply for the next 3 years. Any questions?
Just that we operate independently of the city's aggregate program, correct?
Correct. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We had 5 companies quote our gas supply, and this was the most competitive rate.
Okay. All right, thank you. Then may I have a motion to approve the treasurer's report?
so moved.
I'll second, and may I have a roll call?
Mrs. Zoller,
Yes.
Mrs. Broderick,
Yes.
Mr. Meese,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Mrs. Yee.
Yes,
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is a discussion on school planning for next year. Mr. Weber.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I wanted to share the main details that we have for our plan for re-entering school in the 21-22 school calendar year. So I will share highlights from our plan, and then we'll be sending communication out to staff and to families later on this afternoon. And in that communication, we'll have the most frequently asked questions that we're receiving now, and we can continue to add to those questions as other questions come up. But you know, I met with buildings yesterday and shared just my appreciation, our family's appreciation, our students' appreciation for all the work that went into this year. There's been some extraordinary things happening to keep students safe, to keep them successful, whether they were at school or at home. It's been pretty amazing to see how our staff members have functioned throughout the year, and that's all of our staff members in whatever capacity they work in the district. Everyone has been committed to doing things differently so that students could engage in school as much as they possibly could throughout a pandemic. Just absolutely amazing. But as we look to 21-22, we're excited about many things that allow us to modify our plan. We obviously have reduced levels of COVID in our community. We have a greater knowledge of COVID transmission and how that happens. We've I think perfected some of our safety protocols and have instituted those across all of our building environments. And you know, we see this opportunity for vaccinations coming to our staff members, our families, and now many of our students. So all of those things combined allow us to modify our plan. So as we look at opening school next year, we're really transitioning to an in-person learning plan for all students. That's the major change. And we're going to continue to do some of the protocols that we know work and keep our students safe. And as we always have said, we'll modify our plan when needed. And so we're going to keep connecting with our science advisory team. We'll continue to look at all the things that we've looked at throughout this year, COVID in our community, our ability to provide those protective measures in our schools, the current rates of COVID in our school system, in our community. We'll continue to watch those things. But I feel pretty confident in our ability to move toward that in-person plan. But as part of this discussion, what I wanted to do was share some of share the protocols that we will have in place in each of our buildings next year. And then I'll also share some of the questions that we've pulled out that we think people are going to want to know the answers to. So in terms of our protective measures that we'll have in place, we will continue to require masking for our students and staff. Absolutely, as we start the year, that will be in place. We'll maintain the setup of our classrooms and spaces to maximize social distancing to whatever degree we can. I think that's going to be a measure that we continue to put in place. We'll continue to use hand sanitizer throughout our buildings, our buses, just as we have done this year, continuing the routine cleaning of our facilities. We will also continue to monitor our HVAC system. Jan Wilking has been very careful to think about how that intersects with COVID and the use of our filters, and she'll maintain the exact protocols that she has done this year. We'll continue contact tracing as we have in the past whenever there's a positive case of COVID. And we'll continue to communicate as we have in the past also. Our transportation efforts will continue as they have in the past in terms of keeping 2 students per seat whenever possible for students who are utilizing transportation. So those factors are going to continue, and there are other conversations that buildings will have on certain items that are unique to buildings, such as locker use, hallway, movement, backpack usage. All of those items are really unique to the different buildings that students are attending, and so those will be building level conversations. The building leadership teams will determine what the best protocols are for those items. Some of the questions that we see will most likely come up, and these will be included in our communication that goes out later today. Most likely there'll be a question about personal barriers. As you know, at the high school and at the middle school, our students are using the personal barriers that they take around the building with them. I think our students have strong feelings about personal barriers, and with CDC guidance that in essence says that there's no need to continue the use of those barriers, we are not going to be using personal barriers at our middle school and high school. We do have plexiglass barriers at the primary schools. We're still trying to figure out how they might best be used. They're in classrooms right now. We've had conversations about potentially utilizing them in the cafeteria. We don't have a definitive action on those, but for the personal barriers at the middle school and the high school, those will be discontinued. There's a question where if a parent has a question on who to contact if they have concerns about their child attending in-person learning, we're asking them to reach out to their building principal. We know that there's going to be many questions. This is a change for some of our students, and we want to make sure that we're having conversations on how we can best transition students into our classrooms. And so that conversation is important, and we want families to reach out to building principals soon. Another question about recording lessons for students to access at home when absent. Will we be recording lessons? So with the return to in-person learning, we will not be recording lessons or utilizing Zoom for synchronous learning at home. What we're going to be doing is really focusing on our use of Canvas. If students are absent from school, that learning information and anything that students are held accountable for is going to be placed in Canvas. The great thing about a pandemic is we've exponentially increased our knowledge on Canvas and how to use Canvas consistently across the entire district. And so we'll be using that tool better than we ever have. And so we'll rely on the use of Canvas for learning material and for that communication. There's a question about if a child has been vaccinated, will they need to quarantine as if they are identified as a close contact to a person with a COVID infection. So just like we have in the past, we'll contact trace as we normally do. And so if there's a positive COVID case in our schools, we'll contact trace. And then if a student is found to be a close contact, but they've been vaccinated, CDC guidance now allows for them to remain in school. So we'll continue with that guidance. If they've been vaccinated. For students that have not been vaccinated, they would be asked to quarantine at that time. As guidance change, we'll continue to follow that guidance and talk about any of those changes within our science advisory team. Next question, if my child does need to quarantine or if they're infected with COVID, how will the classroom teacher communicate learning information during that time? Again, that will go to Canvas. And so in each of our building meetings, we spoke about the importance of utilizing that tool to communicate with families, especially in the case where a student does need to quarantine. And if they're home for 10 days, that tool will be invaluable to make sure that the student understands what the content is to be learned, how they can access that, and then how they can keep up during that time frame. Also in our FAQ that we'll be sending out, we do have a link to Canvas information for parents and for staff members so that everyone understands how Canvas is going to be used, the different ways it will be used, so that there's a spreadsheet within the FAQ that will be going home. We have a question about paper usage. And the question about using paper was a big deal during a pandemic. And so we're moving and shifting to a more typical instructional approach. And so what we're saying is the use of paper versus technology is going to be determined by the individual staff member. And that decision is an instructional decision. And so when it's more appropriate, when we think students will learn better using paper pencil, then teachers will be utilizing paper pencil strategies. If we think technology helps to amplify learning, we'll utilize technology. And that's the way that we look at technology pre-pandemic. So we're going back to those individual decisions by teachers. So we will be utilizing paper. There's a question about volunteers. Will volunteers be allowed in schools and classrooms during the 21-22 school year? And yes, we are going to be inviting volunteers back into our schools. Obviously, they'll need to follow the same safety protocols that we have for students and for staff, such as masking and social distancing within the schools. But we will be utilizing volunteers again. And I think in our FAQ, we'll have a link to the volunteer application so that information is right there for families. And then the last question that families will see is, excuse me, regarding when the CDC changes guidance and whether or not Wyoming City Schools will immediately change our protocols. And the answer is no. As CDC changes their guidance, often the Ohio Department of Health and then the Hamilton County Public Health Department modify their guidance. And sometimes there's a time frame for some of those changes to take place. We have a great process in place where we go to our science advisory team when changes come up. We discuss those changes for Wyoming City Schools, and then we determine for ourselves what makes sense. And so an immediate change by the CDC doesn't mean that there's a light switch that flicks on or off and immediately changes our plan. What it does, though, is it allows us to have a conversation about what the most appropriate decision is for Wyoming City Schools. So we'll monitor how things are going in Wyoming City Schools and make changes as appropriate, but they're just not automatic if a change comes from the CDC. So I think that's an important thing to realize because things are moving pretty quickly right now and changes are happening very often. But we will utilize all that information at hand and make decisions for our school district, again, as appropriately as we possibly can. So that's what I've got in terms of our plan. It's pretty simple. We've been continuing to move in a direction of in-person learning. Right now, the conversations that are taking place are all about the safety protocols that we need to put in place so that our students are safe in our buildings. And again, if there are any questions, we ask that families reach out to their building principals.
Ilya, I think you had a question.
One thing, well, I had a couple and try to keep them brief. Will volunteers be required to vaccinate, or they will be kind of the same thing that teachers are, where they have the choice on being vaccinated or not?
Right. At this time, they're not. And so at this time, we're focused on just making sure that they're following the same safety protocols that we have in place. That's the biggest priority for us right now.
Okay. And on the recording of the content, I thought I heard you say that if a student has been vaccinated and they are in quote close contact, they will not be required to quarantine. But if they're not been vaccinated and they're in close contact, they will be required to quarantine. Is that right?
That is the current guidance, and I'll look to Susie and to see if there has been any changes to the guidance that we have at this time.
No, that's what we're doing right now. The only slight difference is if you are identified as a close contact and you have been vaccinated, but you're showing symptoms, you do need to quarantine. That's
it seems like choosing not to video is for people who, it seems like it's a good nudge for people to be vaccinated, because it feels like if you're out of school for 10 days and you just have Canvas, it will be helpful, but it feels challenging that you would stay connected with things that are happening across 5 or 6 classes being gone for 10 days. So it feels like that's a nudge for parents to sort of keep that from happening to their kids by getting them vaccinated. Is that an intentional kind of element, or am I hearing or thinking about that wrong?
No, I wouldn't say that's intentional. I think the biggest part of that decision is best practice instruction, and what we're trying to do is allow teachers to teach in a way that they know best how to teach. And that one of the biggest challenges to our school plan from this past year, and we knew that going in, but it was more important for us at this point during this year to have synchronous instruction happening, whether students were at home or at school. But the challenge has been that having yourself behind the computer for the duration of the day keeps you from the instructional strategies that you typically would implement in your classroom. And that's proximity work with students, that's setting up small groups and movement around the room. And so it's more an instructional decision as opposed to anything else. But I will say then, in the conversations that we had in our buildings yesterday, you're highlighting the one piece that we've got to think through that there's no plan book for, is it's when there's an extended absence, no different from an extended absence when we were living life before the pandemic, when a student had a surgery or they were going to be out an extended period of time. How do we create a plan for students, and how do we connect with families so that they understand how they can access the learning and continue on as best as possible if they're in a quarantine situation? I think we have access to technology that makes us better in that regard. So we should be better than we were before the pandemic, but we'll have to continue to monitor that specific scenario, because that's the one area that we know some students will experience, and we know we've got to create individual plans for students when that point comes.
And I think it's important to mention the reason that we can move to basically the no Zooming, the pandemic way we were operating is the availability of the vaccine, the spread going down within our community. And it's to a point that we can make that happen and work with students on an individual basis through Canvas and the teacher. And I mean, it is important to mention that I don't know that we have a timeline of when 12 and under are going to be able to be vaccinated, even if people wanted to. So, and yes, the spread doesn't seem to happen as much with the younger kids, and our teachers have the, opportunity to be vaccinated. And I think most have chosen that. And, I don't, sounds like you're anticipating a big spread. It sounds like you're thinking of it. We know more about technology, and we can use Canvas better so that we can work with students on a case-by-case basis if these long extended absences come up.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Tim, would we still be doing health forms to encourage people to still stay home? I know there's that balance of like, you don't want to miss because then it's not recorded, but you also don't want to be sending your kids.
Right. That's a great question. And we will continue to communicate with families, communicate with our staff members, the importance of monitoring on a daily basis your own health and all of those potential symptoms. But we will not be doing the daily health screening forms. And we think our families and our staff members have gotten into a great practice of considering their own health on a day-by-day basis. And I think that will be successful without those forms. Mm-hmm.
And then would it also be a building choice for like lunch and recess? Because I know that's different for primary. For sure, they've been eating in the buildings. Middle school, I know they're spread out. Is that to be determined as well? Of because there'd be more bodies, not a ton, but
yeah, our middle school and high school will continue as we start the year. They will continue to have social distancing of 6 feet between students during their lunch periods. Their facilities allow for them to continue to be apart, which is a huge benefit to those facilities. In the primary, we have not been able to do that. And so we'll not be socially distanced at a 6 foot range at the primary schools. And we're still working through that plan to figure out what makes the most sense with the lunchtime routine at our primaries. And specifically, we're looking at moving lunch, which we've had in the classrooms this year, to the cafeteria, and how can we modify our cafeteria structures, our tables, to best suit our students during that time frame. So that's still some planning that we're doing at this time. But our middle school and our high school will look very similar next year as we start the year.
I have another question.
Sure.
Historically, I know there used to be the for upcoming fifth graders, there used to be the tour. I might have missed this. You might have already done it. And then I know like my daughter's in fifth grade now. So then you all modified that, which is great. They got to take a tour a little bit later. Is something like that happening? And then my part two of that is I know some current fifth graders who actually never came into the building. So they've been remote the whole way. Would they be people who need to reach out to the principal, or is the principal reaching out to them to have them come in to feel welcome so they know what they're doing when they're sixth graders now that it's going to be in person?
That's
all
great.
make
So
sense?
the tour, I know our students are taking tours, and so we have a tour of our fourth grade kiddos are coming up. We have a tour here in about 12 minutes.
Oh,
At the
okay.
middle school. So we're excited about that. I'm going to go catch them as soon as we're done here. So those are happening. We're excited about that. We know that's a very big deal for our kids, and that's a big transition item. I will, that's a good question about our fifth grade students. I don't want to share anything that might not be the case. So I'll check back in on how we're connecting with those families to allow them to enter into and feel comfortable with their environment as they come back to school.
I just think that'd be great. I don't think that number's high, but I know of some of them, and I know that how I would feel if we were.
I think that's a great, right. That's a great point. Mm-hmm.
And maybe probably the same for, I think I know some ninth graders, or any building, right? But I know the same for a ninth grader or ninth graders that didn't really come in and experience it. So might feel nervous to be a 10th grader or however that looks. That would be.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Yeah, of course. And then I think it's just great to know that, I guess at least for personally, honestly, I didn't think I'd be sitting here getting to be full vaccinated by May when we were talking back in January. So we realized that by August, things could be different. So just to know that you have a plan and know that we're always looking at it to modify it. And I know some people will be irritated that the kids still have to wear masks. And I just want to say I know that you all are looking at it. I think the kids have adapted great. Half the time I see kids wearing it on their way to school and home, and you're like, you can take that off.
Right.
And sometimes as parents, we impose some of the stuff that I know I do, that I'm feeling right for them. So
yeah, they've done, our kids they've done wonderfully with all of it. And they support one another and help each other be successful with those protocols. So we're going to hold on to them and just be careful about making decisions that will continue to allow us to engage in in-person learning. And again, as changes come, we'll talk about those as a team and utilize all the information that we have available to us. We've set systems up that really help us to make those decisions. So we'll continue to utilize those systems.
How often does the science team advisory team meet at this point?
We've been meeting every other week.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think as things change, I think we've been pretty flexible to the point where if we need to pull together sooner, we can do that with changes with anything that comes up, and so we'll continue to do that. A lot of our conversation has recently been on, and I'll look to Susie Hankey here, who's been instrumental in setting up the vaccination opportunity here in our school district. So we've been talking a lot about that most recently.
Oh, and that's something, I know you had mentioned it, Tim, but was it just yesterday that it's finally for 12 and up? I know we've kind of been waiting for it. Is that something you all are considering opening it up to if we have that opportunity? Or is that too early to say, Susie?
Susie, do you have an update?
I do. So the Food and Drug Administration approved the usage in 12 to 15-year-olds yesterday. There are a couple steps that still need to happen before we start administering, or anybody starts administering. So the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices for the CDC has to also make a recommendation. After that, the states would look at it, but Governor DeWine has already said that he will immediately take action once that recommendation from the CDC comes. So, and our partner for this clinic is Hamilton County Public Health. So we're already with that public health authority. So we are ready to pivot and include that, but there are just a couple more things that need to happen. That advisory committee had previously set up a meeting for Wednesday night. So, I'd love it if they met earlier than that and they made some decisions and it wasn't all right up to the wire, but it may be right up to the wire. But we are ready to move forward as long as all of those public health advisories fall into place.
So should parents of 12, or no, I guess it's 14 to 16-year-olds, right?
No, it is 12 and up.
12
to 15 is the additional pocket.
Yeah, I thought Pfizer was only approving 14 to 16. Anyway, should parents make an appointment for Thursday morning then, I guess is my question.
So it is actually a walk-in clinic. So there are no appointment, no payment, no insurance, no residency requirements. So it is walk-in. So it is 9 to 12 a.m. at the Dr. Dan Jones Family Champion Center. And we're just kind of shift how many doses we have on site, when we get to that. There's a lot of guessing that's going on. And one thing that goes on with that facility, it's exciting to get people into that facility, but there's very limited parking there. So I would like everybody to understand, don't go to the high school. You're not going into the high school where the high school is still for students and staff during instructional hours. So this is all in the new athletic facility, accessible from Burns, 111 Burns Avenue. And we would love everybody who can come on foot to come on foot because there's very limited parking. There's accessible parking that's right next to the building, but any other parking will be on the surrounding streets. So
I guess the follow-up, Susie, for me is I almost forgot. So my children are just becoming available, some of them. So it's I had the Thursday date in mind, but I guess my follow-up for you is, if there wasn't that pressure, do you anticipate that there would be a secondary date? So for those families who are yes, I want my 12, 13, 14-year-old to be vaccinated, but we can't make Thursday. Do you think the schools would be doing a different?
So this is what I've seen in this process kind of throughout the year. Months ago, we kind of worked together with a partner to figure out how we can facilitate vaccination administration to staff members, and now we're kind of working with Hamilton County Public Health to see how we can do it for here. I would like to think that then we just be able to continue to grow those opportunities and refine our practices so that we can put something into place, even quicker when those opportunities arise. There are a lot of pieces that need to come together to be able to offer this. So it would not be like a quick, immediate turnaround kind of a thing, but we absolutely, we live in a community that's very interested in vaccination, and we absolutely want to facilitate those opportunities as much as we can. So.
Thank you. Because in my brain, it's even some of us have, our kids will turn 12 by the summer. So there's going to be another pocket of kids before school starts. So, that's my own self. So I would find a place for my kids, but knowing the amount of people around her age, that it just makes it easier. not for you. I mean, I understand all those pieces for you. So thank you for even making that an opportunity. For those of us who it would be newer for us Thursday, if we find out Wednesday night, so we just go to the school, like call out our kids for that minute, say we're
Yeah.
taking them over to get vaccinated.
So it's probably important to understand that when minors are getting vaccinated, the parent does need to be on site, or that student has to have a completed consent form. That is on our website. We'll be putting out in the blogs. It'll go out in the weekly update today. There's a event on our online district calendar, and it's there. So the city is going to be sharing information through their information sources. So it should be available, but it is important for parents to understand when minors are getting vaccinated, they do need to either be on site or that student needs to have a completed consent form.
Thank you. I know you wrote it all, but I think sometimes it's easier to hear it from your mouth for me. Okay. Thanks for doing all of that.
Yeah, thank you, Susie, for organizing that.
This is very exciting.
Mhm.
It gets more exciting by this, CDC meets on Wednesday and we start with the shots on Thursday. It would be nicer if that was a little calmer, but fabulous to be able to do it in-house with our kids. We could end up with the entire high school vaccinated before the school's over.
Mhm.
That's fabulous.
Good news. Good news.
All right. Is there anything else? Well, we have passed our time, so I guess we'll. I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
A second. All right.
Maybe we'll get the hang of this by our last Zoom meeting. Maybe. Okay.
I probably should have made little signs that you could hold up.
Oh, yeah.
All right. May I have a roll call?
Mrs. Broderick,
Yes.
Mr. Meese,
Yeah.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Mrs. G,
Yes.
and Mrs. Zoller.